So, without further ado, as they say in YouTube land, over to Roland Perry.
Our honorary president.
Yes, our honorary president.
Honorary means I'm not paid.
Yes, because we're all making so much money out of this event. Roland, many people obviously know you through the CPC and your Amstrad story. But if we met in a garden somewhere or a pub instead of a retro event, how would you introduce yourself these days?
Well, I'd introduce myself as an antique dealer who has a share in a community pub on the Cambridge-Essex border.
Okay. And tell us a little bit more about that, because that's something quite recent for you, isn't it?
Well, I've always kind of not necessarily collected, but I've refrained from throwing away various artifacts from the 1980s. But more recently, I've been trying to collect things, going to local auctions and house clearance sales and things like that. And so I've got a little business, I think they call it a side hustle, something like that. Rachel Reeves wants to tax me, but good luck with that. One of the things which I did soon after retirement from my main day jobs was to work for East Cambridgeshire Council in a department where some of my colleagues were responsible for communities of buildings of community, assets of community interest, which were pubs. So pubs that want to close and turn themselves sell as a family home, the council comes along and says, we're not going to give you change of use planning permission for that because it still needs to be something to do with the community rather than just a family home. And then when one of those came up, after I'd left working for that department, one of them came up on the South Cambridgeshire border with Essex, and I thought, well, this sounds like a good project to get involved in. So I've been involved in that for 2 years now. I've been on television and all sorts of things like that, pulling the first pint. I was unanimously voted onto the management committee last week, and my next meeting's on Tuesday. So that's one of my retirement jobs. There's nothing at all to do with 8-bit computers, thankfully.
But we all have lives around and extraneous to our 8-bit computers. Yeah. But for many of us, me included, we can trace our lives back and our careers and things like that, maybe to having an 8-bit computer or having a certain influence on our lives. And you've certainly heard from people in the past who say the CPC has changed their life. How does it feel, some 4 decades later, for that to be the case and to be hearing those stories now?
Well, I'm very proud that so many people had a 464 or the later machines bought for them, and it started their career off in programming, mainly in software rather than in hardware. Whereas my fiance out there, who's gone away, she's a hardware person, but mainly in software. And I'm, it just makes me so proud to see all these hundreds, maybe thousands of people who started their careers in programming by having an Amstrad 8-bit computer for which I wrote a computer manual which was this thick and said, this isn't just what it does, but what you want to do with it. And so here we are, a generation later.
And how many of you, let's have a show of hands, would put yourself in that category of something like the CPC changed your life or was a big impact on your work and career? Well, I mean, we've got a slightly biased audience, I think, Roland. But for many of us, it wasn't just a computer we got for Christmas. It's something that's really impacted what we do. And you've said here about you wrote this manual, and your ambition for the CPC, as I understand, was much closer to something like the BBC Micro, which certainly in the UK was ubiquitous in schools. Lots of nods. Okay, similar ages going on here, I can see. Where did that vision come for you personally?
Well, because before I got involved in the Amstrad project, I'd been writing freelance for a public monthly publication, doing reviews of all sorts of micros that turned up. and I'd done quite an extensive review of the BBC Micro, which is a massively over-engineered and, in some sense, not terribly useful computer, although there's a whole computer mafia in Cambridge who would burn me at the stake for saying that. What I wanted was something where we could learn from the things they didn't do as well as could have been done. So we put together a proposal which turned out to be the 464, and some people said this is going to be a game, it's basically going to be a console, games computer console, which happens to have a keyboard and a floppy and a tape drive. And I thought, well, actually, I'd prefer it to be something like an affordable BBC Micro to teach people how to learn about computing. But we managed to do all of them simultaneously. It's like kind of spinning plates, you just got to juggle it around. So that's, I hope, what we did. But I only was involved in the CPC project for about 3 years, because then I moved on to PC compatibles and other stuff like that. And people often ask me, what is your favourite CPC game?
So Roland, what is your favourite CPC game?
Well, the answer is I didn't used to play them very much because I wasn't a gamer. So we used Harry Attack on the prototypes to check that the hardware worked. We had Indiscomp who turned up with Roland, that's me, in the caves, and Roland, that's me doing something else. And that was quite interesting. But I didn't used to play them very much. But one day a chap from Gem Software, who happened to be just down the road, I think in Bishop Stortford, turned up and said, we'd like to write a game for the computer. And I said, well, come along. Here's a desk in the corner of my office. Come along and do that. And that was Roland in Time. So he wrote Roland in Time on a desk in the corner of my office. And every now and again, he would come along and say, well, what do you think about this? And I'd say, well, it looks all right. You could try changing that and changing that. So he produced Roland in Time. And then about a year later, he did Roland in Space, which is probably my favourite game because it's got all the Doctor Who references in it. And about 3 years ago, it was referenced on the BBC's Doctor Who programme because there was a scene on the BBC where the TARDIS landed in Isaac Newton's garden with a CPC as the console.
Now, I'm not a Doctor Who fan, but who here has seen that?
David Tennant comes out of the TARDIS and he's holding the CPC wired to the TARDIS.
Very nice. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I've learned something today. Every day's a school day.
Yeah.
And so speaking of kind of learning, and you said about the manual that you created so that people could learn from that. And you also put together the welcome tape.
Yeah, my job was to, as project manager, most of the engineering work was done by colleagues of mine. Because what I've always said is, I could have designed the computer myself, but it would have taken 3 years, and we only had 3 months. So I had to hire 10 other people to help me. And because most of them were very clever, very capable, and listened to what I said to them, we managed to get it done in this incredibly accelerated timescale. And so one of the things, once we got the computer designed, that wasn't the end of the project, because lots of people designed a computer which was never going to sell to anybody because it didn't have a user manual, it didn't have any software, it didn't have a distribution channel. So we got sucked into this whole thing about 50 games in Dixon's on launch day and a manual and all sorts of other software, which just kind of completely consumed us for about 2 years afterwards. That's the Amsoft thing. So I had a lot of really capable, clever, loyal people who helped me do that. And I'm very grateful, and I know many of them today. Unfortunately, because I'm 73,
You don't look a day over 72.
And a lot of my colleagues are unfortunately falling off their perches at the moment. So I'd like to get in contact with as many of them as possible to at least just say, thank you for all the fish.
So you said that working with Sir Alan Sugar was, I was going to use the word easy, perhaps that's not the right word, but that you were never in doubt about what you were supposed to be doing. Tell us a bit more
Well,
about
of course,
that.
he wasn't a sir then.
Okay,
He was
all
just
right, Alan.
just a plain Alan Sugar. And he's very straightforward, plain speaking, honest. I want you to do this. Can you do it? Most of the time I said yes. And he said, go and do it then. We didn't have to wait for 3 or 4 months to lawyers to draw up contracts. We just went off and did it because we knew we'd get paid. Because at the time, Amstrad had a business model which was the complete opposite of GEC, which is the other big Arnold Weinstock chairman. Their business model was you hire all these people to do things for you and pay them 3 or 4 months later. Amstrad's business model was you hire people to do these things and you pay them 3 or 4 days later. They're much more willing to do the work for you. And we could buy things from Japan. We go to Japan and say, we'd like to buy 100,000 Z80 chips and we're going to pay for them.
And you were going to have the 100,000. You weren't just going to order 1,000,
No,
were you?
whereas Clive Sinclair, never speak ill of the dead, I suppose, he'd go to Japan and say, I want to buy 100,000 Z80 chips, and he'd get delivered 10,000 of them and pay for 5,000 of them, which pissed off the Japanese quite a lot.
Yeah, understandably. So where you were negotiating prices and, you had this 3-month timeline, were there any moments where the price pressure specifically nearly compromised the product?
No, I didn't negotiate the prices. That was people in Amstrad who'd been doing that job for decades. They did the negotiation of the prices. What I did was I said to them, here's this design for a computer we've got. We can make it twice as good if you spend another 5p on the components.
Okay, and how did that go down?
Usually fairly well, because they trusted me that when I said, you've got this computer you're going to sell in Dixon's for £300, which means you're going to sell it to Dixon's for £200, which means the factory in Japan's going to sell it to you for £150. If you spend 5p more on some components, then it's going to be so much more attractive to your customers. That's where we got the 27 colours from. The 27 colours is 6 resistors. It's absolutely nothing. It's brain power from a very talented engineer who was on my team, but only 6 resistors.
So this is something I think is really interesting about all the team that you had around you and all these talented people you were talking about, because Alan, certainly in his autobiography, says things about the boffins and how he's not one of these kind of technical people, and he talks about the Cambridge crowd quite a lot, even though his design team was full of this Cambridge crowd.
Yeah.
How did that public persona compare to what you were working with?
Well, it was very annoying because he decided to have this public persona, which is, I'm an East End borough boy and I don't understand computers and I don't get on with Cambridge graduates, except his entire business model was created by 4 or 5 or 6 Cambridge graduates. So, we just had to bite our lip and say, well, we're not going to criticise you in public. We just had this completely different public persona to this private one when we were working together, except on The Apprentice, if you watch that, and I was actually one of the consultants on the first episode of The Apprentice, designing the tasks they did. He, in real life, is absolutely the same as he is on that show. It's not an act, that's absolutely what he's like.
And tell us more about getting involved in those tasks and working on The Apprentice.
All they did was they sent me a script, storyboards they call it in that industry. We're going to have this show, it's going to have 10, 12 tasks. This is what they're going to be. What do you think about that? And I said, well, this one you need to tune a bit and that one you need to tune a bit. Apart from that, it's reasonably good. So we sent it all back and that's what created the first series of The Apprentice. The first series of The Apprentice was actually quite interesting because it wasn't the first series in the world, because that was in the USA with that Trump man. You probably heard of him. And so they cloned it in the UK. But every contestant on the first series of The Apprentice was at a crossroads in their life. They didn't know what they were going to do next. So they thought, well, let's apply to this game show and see what happens. And it was quite successful for many of them, but not just the winner, but some of the runners-up also built a career based on that.
We've talked a little bit about the timeline, the teams that you've had, the costing and all of that kind of stuff to do with the quality of the components. So you've obviously got quite a unique vantage point on that era of working for Amstrad. Is there anything that you wish the retro community would know or understand better about what it was like, about how Amstrad really operated as a business at that time?
You just need to understand that it was a community. Okay, it wasn't just people working for an employer. Because one of the things I did, I hired some people to be on my first team, and about a month into the project, I hired a minibus on a Sunday and drove them all to Alexandra Palace because it was a Sinclair user show. And I said, come with me to this show. And they didn't charge me overtime. They just said, okay, we'll come along. And we went round the Sinclair user show, whatever it was called, Alexandra Palace. And I said, one day we'll have a show here which is bigger and better than this. And they all said, you're mad, never going to happen. You're just dreaming. And then about a year later, it was true. Because everybody just threw their entire heart and effort and everything they did into the project. And if they didn't throw everything about them into the project, then you're fired. Go off and get a job with somebody else then.
Nick Russell, who's one of our co-organisers, has said, you said you're not much of a gamer, so what was your favourite software back in the day for the CPC?
Well, the one that was probably most influential was the welcome tape, because everyone forgot.
He really likes his welcome tape.
Yeah, everyone forgot that it needed a welcome tape. And so I said, well, I'm going to do a welcome tape. So I did it. Because nobody else was going to.
We've all worked in teams like that, I think, haven't we? And Vincenti, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, has said, is there anything you would have changed in the original CPC design?
Well, this is one of these questions that everybody asks me at every one of these sessions, and I've answered it 50 times. I'd have made it a 7-bit printer port, because everyone keeps bitching and moaning. An 8-bit printer port, because everyone keeps bitching and moaning it's only a 7-bit printer port.
You are judging our machine of the meat today, and as you look around at what people have done with their machines, what horrifies you and what impresses you about how the community has taken things way beyond your original design?
Well, nothing's horrified me, it's all delighted me.
Oh, well, that's nice. That's not what you said to me earlier. But no, that's lovely. And so I want to go a little bit beyond the CPC now, because as you often say, that was a small part of your life and you've had a slightly longer life. So it's nice to celebrate some of the other things that you've done. You talked about this PCW and you told me earlier on that it's a 6128 with better monochrome graphics, is what I think you said to me, but built by the same team. What do you think the PCW got particularly right for ordinary users?
The main thing it got right was you could see an A4 letter on the screen without scrolling sideways and up and down all the time. Plus, the software was designed by people who'd been working on industrial strength word processors previously, which is just a complete coincidence, but it all fell into place.
Yeah,
so I think
you said they were quite high-end, high-spec software, wasn't it?
It turned out to be a very high-spec word processor. And when we were designing it and selling it originally, we thought, how long is it going to be before somebody else produces a clone that works better than this? There's all these big American companies, these big Japanese companies. They could just ride in and produce an IBM or a Sanyo or something else word processor, which was better than ours and cheaper than ours, and nobody ever did that because we aced it the first time round and nobody else could produce anything better.
How many of you are PCW fans and had those back in the day? Maybe we certainly did. Does anybody have any of them now? Oh, yeah, well, obviously Simon
And
does.
so many people wrote their first novel, their first book, their first thesis on a PCW. Oh, and vicars who wrote their sermons on it.
It was an absolutely great business machine. Loved
Yeah.
it. You've spoken about your wife, and you and your wife, among many other things, helped pioneer, and I didn't know this until talking to you, the cover CDs for CompuServe and UK Online. Did anybody have those cover CDs back in the day? Got on the internet, a few of you? I still remember my CompuServe email address was 106.152.3157@compuserve.com. I don't think it works though, so don't try sending any emails to it. It was all about cutting acquisition costs, wasn't it? And that was quite
Well, that's right. Yeah, back then, if you're a new startup business in any sphere, for example, if you're a CompuServe and you're wanting to get new customers for your business, there's a customer acquisition cost, which in those days you had to do advertising and all sorts of other things, and it was about £40 or £50 a customer, which you multiply by 4 today, so it costs you £200 to acquire a customer. But one of the cheaper ways to acquire a customer is to put a cover disc on a magazine. All right, and so you draw people in. The cover disc's free to the customer. It's free to the magazine. So my wife was brilliant at the marketing in this, and she said, "Okay, so we need to stick a cover disc on the magazine with the biggest circulation in the UK, which at the time was BBC Radio Times. Had a circulation of, I don't know, 8 or 10 million. So all you have to do is produce 8 or 10 million cover discs, ship them to the Radio Times printers, and they stick them on the cover, and it's all in WH Smiths or through to their subscribers. And it costs about 1/10 as much to acquire a subscriber by doing that as doing conventional advertising, which is TV adverts, billboards, and all sorts of other stuff that you're doing."
And your wife also had, she worked at Amstrad for America, didn't she?
Well, she was hired by Amstrad USA as their marketing manager about a year before I met her. I still don't understand why I didn't bump into her for about a year, because I used to go over there quite a lot. I did eventually bump into her, and I went to a trade show in April, I think it was, Comdex Spring 1998. And I went to Convention Centre, which is huger than Olympia Royals Court, and I went in with Mark Simons, who's Alan's brother-in-law. So he's married to Anne Simons, and he was at the time helping Amstrad Inc. get set up. So I got sent over there just to help them get the booth set up, and my job was to go along and just make sure everything works and everyone did what they were told. And I was stood there, I was on the balcony, mezzanine, overlooking the audience, overlooking the day on setup. And I said to Mark Simons, "What's that lady there who seems to be in charge of setting up the booth?" And he said, "Oh, that's Jennifer." And I said, "I'm taking her back home with me."
Was that in a suitcase or?
And so we all worked, 7 days a week, more than 12 hours a day. We just threw everything we had at it, and it worked.
Well, it certainly worked. We've still got the machines working now, so it's a testament to that. And so bringing us a little bit more up to date, a lovely prop here. So if you've never seen this is the CPC Mini. How many of you have seen these? Few of you have. So if you want to know more about it, speak to Simon, who's standing up at the back here. This is his one that he 3D printed and spent many hours and much swearing and doing all of the soldering in here. So this is one that obviously you can do as a project yourself. It's not one you can buy off the shelf.
Well, I would like to see that in the shops for £9.99.
£9.99.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'd fly off the shelves and
Tenner, Simon, will that do?
manufacture that for £9.99.
So tell us more about how that could work. Do you think that there would be a demand for it?
I think there'd be a demand for it. I don't think there's any electronics or hardware in it that you couldn't, in sufficient quantity, manufacture for about £4 or £5, which means it could be £10 in the shops.
So put your orders in with Roland. If you think about the younger generations now who want to maybe build products or services or software, what kind of advice would you give them?
I think I would encourage them, if they wanted to learn about getting a foothold in modern consumer electronics, to buy a Raspberry Pi. Because that was created by my great rivals at Acorn, but 2 decades later. And you can learn about it and you can design things. Nowadays you can get AI to write your software. You can probably today go to Gemini and say, write me a CPC emulator of Raspberry Pi, and 2 minutes later it will give you all the code.
Across everything you've done, is there anything that you've done that you're quietly most proud of?
I'm most proud of the work I did to protect vulnerable ladies from being killed by their husbands.
Tell us more about that.
Unfortunately, lots of ladies shack up with gentlemen who are not terribly sympathetic, and they control them. It's called coercive control. Myself and my late wife wrote the law about coercive control in the UK, and these gentlemen, who they still turn up in the news all the time, they treat their ladies as objects, not people, and they force them to do things like have babies and cook them dinner and things like that, and I find that really quite unfortunate. And so for a couple of years, one of our main jobs was not only introducing the legislation which makes that illegal, but also helping the ladies who would phone up at 11 o'clock at night and say, my husband says he's going to kill me tomorrow morning if I don't do what he tells me. And we would then advise them what to do, which is go to the women's aid shelter in your town. And they say, well, how can I go to the women's aid shelter in my town? I said, call a taxi, any taxi. They know where the women's aid shelter is. They will take you there, and women's aid will look after you. And that was the bit that it just saved hundreds of lives, which I think is really important.
That seems to be a theme from a lot of the stories that you've told, is about just getting things done and working hard and getting things delivered. Yeah. And is that something that you find is a strength of yours through your work? It's what I'm seeing.
You want something doing, persuade people to do it. So when I was doing the software for the CPCs and the PCWs, and the people at Locomotive were sitting there going, oh, it's all a bit difficult, we've got some bugs in this, we need to, it's 6 o'clock on a Friday, we need at least another 4 or 5 hours to sort this out. And I said, okay, I'll be down there at 10 o'clock this evening then to pick it up when you've finished. And I'd drive back at midnight. You've got to keep the pace up. It's not working a 40-hour week or a 35-hour week or bitching and moaning about being paid only £80,000 a year to drive a train into the back of another one. You just need to get things done. So
when we get things done and have our 20th anniversary of the UCAG meetup, what do you hope?
I will not be alive in 20 years' time. I'm sorry about that.
People will say in your memory.
They'll say he got things done.
Yes, perfect. Do we have some questions from the audience?
Did any other major computer company try and poach you back in the 90s?
No consumer companies, no. All of my customers, I worked from 1978 to 82 doing small business computers, which is basically multi-user ZA computers. Every single customer of mine tried to poach me. It got a bit tiresome after a while. But no other consumer electronics company tried to poach me. But Sinclair had its own people, Acorn had its own people. I don't know who else could have poached me. Microsoft could have poached me, maybe. I don't know. But they weren't into home computers then.
And I've just got one more thing. As you are our honorary president, and we are very, very happy about that, we just wanted to offer you a trophy just to say thank you for that.
That will go in pride of place in my man cave in Gurn.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So Roland Perry, everybody, thank you very much.